Have you ever stared at the man sleeping beside you and wondered if he is a monster or just a coward? I thought my life was a perfect suburban dream until a crackle from an old baby monitor tore it apart. What I heard that night was a ruthless death sentence for my future. But they forgot one crucial detail. When cornered, a woman does not beg. She burns down everything they hold dear. Hello and welcome back to the Violet Revenge Stories channel. Unfortunately, our channel has been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff and continue creating these stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on the screen or clicking the donation link in the description or pinned comment. My name is Reese Patterson. At 36 years old, I considered myself a master of structural integrity, both in my profession and in my personal life. As a senior architect at Novus Horizon Architecture, a prestigious firm nestled in the lush, rain-swept suburbs of Seattle. My entire world was built on precise blueprints, careful planning, and flawless execution. I took immense pride in constructing a reality where my demanding career and my family life coexisted in perfect harmony. From the outside, our sprawling craftsman home was a picturesque sanctuary, a physical testament to a decade of hard work, shared dreams, and unwavering dedication. The manicured lawn, the warm glow of the porch light, the custom oak door, everything projected an image of absolute suburban bliss. Yet, lately, the foundation of my 10-year marriage with Julian had begun to settle, developing hairline fractures that I tried desperately to patch over. The effortless warmth that once filled our living spaces had been slowly replaced by a chilling, quiet distance. Julian blamed his constant absence and erratic moods on his new tech startup. He claimed he was endlessly busy chasing venture capital, leaving before the morning frost melted and returning long after the streetlights flickered on. His excuses were always wrapped in grand promises about our financial future. But whenever I looked into his eyes, I saw only a hollow detachment. The man who used to hold my hand while we watched the rain beat against the glass was gone, replaced by a restless stranger who treated our home like a mere hotel. My one true solace, the anchor keeping me from drifting away, was our 8-year-old son, Leo. He was the undisputed center of my universe, a bright, gentle, and profoundly imaginative boy who gave my demanding life its deepest meaning. Because Leo occasionally suffered from mild sleepwalking, his physical safety was my utmost priority. That was why an old, slightly faded baby monitor still sat inconspicuously on the side table in the living room. It was a comforting relic from his nursery days. I kept the receiver strictly on my bedside table, providing me with the absolute certainty that if he ever wandered downstairs in the middle of the night, I would hear the creak of the floorboards and guide him safely back to his bed. Then came Chloe. She was introduced as Julian's new business partner, a sharply dressed, flawlessly groomed woman who seemed to suck all the breathable air out of any room she entered. On the surface, she was aggressively friendly, always armed with a dazzling, practiced smile and a stream of excessive compliments about my interior design. But every time she stepped across my threshold, I noticed her eyes darting around my home with a predatory focus. Her gaze was not admiring, it was deeply calculating. She dissected my life, examining the expensive fixtures and the family portraits as if she were appraising a valuable property she fully intended to acquire. The true, suffocating weight of her presence crashed down on me during a stifling dinner party we hosted last Friday evening. I had spent 4 hours roasting a chicken and curating the perfect wine pairing, desperately trying to inject some warmth and life into our crumbling domestic facade. Instead, I found myself sitting at the head of my own dining table, feeling entirely invisible. Julian and Chloe dominated the entire conversation. They exchanged rapid-fire industry jargon, celebrated minor victories I knew nothing about, and laughed at inside jokes that left me completely alienated. But it was not just the words they spoke that made my stomach churn. It was the micro-expressions. I caught a lingering glance over the rim of a crystal wine glass. I saw a subtle, validating nod when I turned my back to serve the salad. I noticed a fleeting smirk shared between them when they thought I was too distracted to notice. They were speaking a silent, toxic language, weaving a tight, exclusive web right in front of my face. I sat there clutching my linen napkin, shivering on the outside of their orbit, realizing with a sinking dread that I had become a stranger in my own perfectly designed life. The unease that took root after that dinner party quickly blossomed into full-blown paranoia, feeding on the quiet, inexplicable changes in our daily routine. It started with the mail. For years, our bank statements and financial notices sat openly on the kitchen island, a mundane testament to our shared life. Then, they simply stopped appearing. When I asked Julian about it, he brushed me off, claiming he had switched everything to paperless billing to reduce our carbon footprint, but his behavior told a different story. I began waking up in the dead of night to find his side of the bed empty. I would creep down the hallway and see the faint, bluish glow of his laptop illuminating his tense face in the home office. The moment he heard my footsteps, the screen would snap shut. He changed his passwords constantly. The familiar sequence of our wedding date was replaced by complex strings of characters he guarded like state secrets. The true fracture in our reality occurred on a mundane Tuesday morning. I was gathering clothes for the dry cleaner, mechanically checking the pockets of Julian's heavy wool overcoat. My fingers brushed against a stiff, folded piece of paper hidden deep within the lining. I pulled it out, assuming it was just another dry cleaning ticket or a coffee receipt. Instead, my breath caught in my throat. It was a wire transfer confirmation for a security deposit on a luxury penthouse. The location listed was not in Seattle, nor anywhere in Washington state. It was in Miami, Florida. The amount printed at the bottom was for $45,000. My mind raced, frantically searching for any logical explanation. Julian had never mentioned expanding his startup to the East Coast. He despised the humidity of Florida. Yet here was a receipt, bearing his signature, for a life I knew absolutely nothing about. When he returned home that evening, I confronted him. I slapped the crumpled receipt onto the granite countertop, my voice trembling but demanding answers. I expected him to panic, to stammer, to offer some convoluted excuse. Instead, his reaction was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He looked at the paper, then looked at me with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. "Are you going through my pockets now, Reese?" he asked, his tone dripping with disappointment. He seamlessly pivoted the conversation, weaving a narrative where I was the villain. He claimed the apartment was a temporary corporate lease for potential investors, a surprise milestone he was keeping secret until the deal closed. Then, he went for the jugular. He told me that my stressful position at Novus Horizon was making me unhinged. He said my obsession with perfection was bleeding into our marriage, turning me into a paranoid, suffocating presence that was actively sabotaging his ability to focus and provide for our family. He spoke with such calm, unwavering conviction that for a terrifying moment, I actually believed him. I found myself apologizing, my own reality warping under the weight of his psychological abuse. To solidify his role as the long-suffering, devoted husband, Julian orchestrated an incredibly lavish celebration for our 10th anniversary the following weekend. He rented out the entire rooftop dining room of the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Seattle. He bought me a diamond necklace that cost at least $20,000, fastening it around my neck while the waitstaff hovered nearby with complimentary champagne. It was a flawless performance of marital devotion. But as he pulled me into an embrace for a photograph, I felt absolutely nothing. His hands resting on my waist felt like heavy, lifeless weights. His smile did not reach his eyes. Every touch, every whispered word of affection was mechanically rehearsed. The diamonds sitting against my collarbone felt less like a gift and more like a glittering, expensive collar designed to keep me quiet and compliant. The disparity between his public display of affection and the cold, calculating stranger he had become in private was nauseating. That night, lying awake next to him, the final remnants of my doubt dissolved into a cold, hard certainty. I was being played, and I needed indisputable proof before my entire world collapsed. I knew Julian was too careful to leave another paper trail. I had to force his hand, to make him think he had won, so he would finally drop his guard. The next evening, I engineered the most explosive argument of our entire marriage. I waited until he was distracted. Then I unleashed a torrent of fabricated rage. I screamed about his emotional absence, his neglect, and the suffocating atmosphere of our home. I brought up every missed dinner, every unanswered text, and every night he spent locked in his office. I threw a heavy porcelain vase against the hallway wall, watching it shatter into 100 sharp pieces, the loud crash echoing through the house. I demanded space, shouting that I could no longer stand the sight of his face and that I was the one leaving to clear my head. I told him I needed at least 3 days of complete, uninterrupted distance to figure out if our marriage was even worth saving. He played his part perfectly, adopting the role of the injured, misunderstood husband, shaking his head at my apparent hysteria while urging me to calm down. But I did not calm down. The stage was set, and it was time for my final test. I grabbed my keys off the counter and slammed the heavy oak front door behind me with enough force to rattle the windows. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood, a definitive punctuation mark to the fabricated chaos I had just unleashed inside. The crisp evening air hit my face, carrying the familiar, persistent drizzle that blanketed Seattle for most of the year. I marched down the driveway, my boots splashing carelessly through the puddles gathering on the pavement. I climbed into my SUV, jammed the key into the ignition, and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires screeched violently against the wet asphalt, leaving a harsh trail of burning rubber as I sped away from my own home. I needed Julian to hear my departure. I needed him to believe that I was a broken, hysterical woman fleeing into the night without a backward glance. The rain lashed against my windshield, blurring the streetlights into smeared streaks of yellow and red, mirroring the chaotic state of my own mind. I drove aimlessly for exactly 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. When I was absolutely certain I was not being followed, I killed the headlights and maneuvered the car down a narrow, unlit alleyway 3 blocks away from our street. I parked behind an overgrown hedge, shutting off the engine and plunging myself into absolute silence. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only mechanical sound left in the heavy night. The rain was falling harder now, a steady drumbeat against the metal roof. I stepped out into the freezing downpour, pulling the hood of my dark raincoat tightly over my head. The walk back was a blur of adrenaline and chilling dread. I stayed in the shadows, avoiding the warm yellow glow of the street lamps, feeling like a criminal trespassing in my own neighborhood. My heart hammered against my ribs with a frantic, agonizing rhythm. I slipped through the back gate of our property and navigated the muddy yard toward the side of the house. Earlier that afternoon, under the guise of organizing storage boxes, I had unlatched a single, narrow basement window hidden behind a thick row of hydrangea bushes. I pushed the damp leaves aside, pressed my hands against the cold glass, and slid the pane open. Crawling through that tight space was suffocating. The smell of damp earth and old cardboard filled my lungs as I dropped silently onto the concrete floor of the basement. I froze, holding my breath for an agonizing full minute, listening intently for any movement above me. There was nothing, just the rhythmic patter of the rain against the foundation. I peeled off my soaking wet shoes and crept up the wooden stairs in my stocking feet, testing every step to avoid the floorboards I knew would creak. The house felt entirely different now. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was a hostile territory, a stage perfectly set for a trap of my own design. I bypassed our master suite and slipped into the guest bedroom at the far end of the hallway. The room was pitch black and freezing cold, but I did not dare touch the thermostat or the light switch. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached into the deep pocket of my coat and pulled out the receiver of Leo's old baby monitor. Before my explosive performance in the kitchen, when Julian was distracted by a phone call in his office, I had meticulously taped the transmitter unit upside down to the wooden frame underneath the large velvet sofa in the living room. It was positioned perfectly in the center of the room, invisible to the naked eye, but highly sensitive to any sound in the surrounding space. I huddled in the darkest corner of the guest room, my wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to my freezing skin, and pushed the power button on the receiver. A low, rhythmic hiss of static filled the silent room. I adjusted the volume dial, turning it up just enough to catch a pin drop, but low enough that the sound would not bleed through the guest room door. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, shivering violently, my eyes fixed on the glowing green indicator light of the device. Every second dragged by like an hour. I questioned my own sanity. I wondered if I had gone completely mad. Sitting in a dark room in wet clothes, spying on my own husband, but the nagging instinct deep in my gut told me to wait. I stared at the digital clock on the bedside table. Exactly 15 minutes had passed since my dramatic exit. The house below me was dead silent, save for the occasional gust of wind rattling the window panes. Suddenly, the sharp, piercing chime of the front doorbell shattered the quiet. The sound blasted through the small speaker in my hand, making me jump. Julian had not hesitated. He had not waited to see if I would come back to retrieve a forgotten item or apologize. He had made a call the second my taillights faded down the street. Through the monitor, I heard the rapid, heavy thud of his footsteps rushing down the hallway toward the foyer. I heard the metallic click of the deadbolt sliding open and the familiar groan of the front door swinging wide. There were no whispered greetings, just the distinct, synchronized sound of two sets of shoes stepping onto the hardwood floor of the living room. A moment later, the sharp, unmistakable pop of a wine bottle being uncorked echoed clearly through the static, followed by the clinking of two glass goblets. The trap had closed. The first voice that pierced the static of the old monitor was hers. Chloe laughed, a low, throaty sound that vibrated right down to my bones and echoed sickeningly in the silent, freezing guest room. "I have to admit, Julian, you played that perfectly," she purred, her tone dripping with a venomous mix of admiration and malice. "I was starting to think you would never get her out of the house for the weekend." She was clinging to this pathetic domestic fantasy like a drowning woman. That little performance in the kitchen was Oscar-worthy. A heavy, relaxed sigh rustled through the small speaker, followed by the familiar deep cadence of my husband's voice. "It was exhausting," Julian replied, his words slurred slightly by his first generous sip of wine. "I had to push every single emotional button to make her snap. I had to play the victim so hard it gave me a headache. But the tantrum she just threw, it was textbook. She actually believes she's punishing me by leaving to get some space. She thinks this is all about me working too much and neglecting our marriage." I sat completely frozen on the edge of the stiff mattress, the freezing dampness of my soaked clothes entirely forgotten. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, and utterly impossible to breathe. I had braced myself to hear the sordid details of a physical affair, the predictable, pathetic confessions of a man cheating on his wife. What came next was a million times worse. It was a methodical, cold-blooded execution of my entire existence. "So, we are completely clear on the timeline?" Chloe asked, the flirtatious warmth vanishing from her voice, instantly replaced by the sharp, calculating edge of a corporate predator. "Everything is permanently set," Julian stated confidently. "The final bank transfer cleared this morning. I forged her signature on the second mortgage paperwork 3 weeks ago. The equity on this massive house is completely gone. I pulled out every last cent the bank would authorize." My heart stopped beating. The walls of the dark room seemed to tilt violently inward. Forged my signature. Second mortgage. My brain scrambled to process the sheer magnitude of his crime. This house, the beautiful sanctuary I had poured a decade of my life into, the safe roof over my child's head, was gone. It was just a hollow shell carrying a massive debt, but the monster sitting in my living room was not finished. "And the boys' accounts," Chloe pressed further, her voice steady and clinical. "Liquidated," Julian answered without a single ounce of hesitation, without a tremor of guilt. "I emptied his entire college fund yesterday afternoon, $150,000, routed straight through the shell company and into the offshore account we set up last month. By the time the bank realizes what happened, that money will be untraceable. A physical wave of nausea slammed violently into my chest. He had stolen from his own flesh and blood. He had taken the money I meticulously saved from every architectural bonus, every late night spent hunched over drafting tables. Money meant to secure a bright, safe future for our 8-year-old son. He had handed our child's future on a silver platter to his mistress. "You are absolute genius," Chloe whispered, and I could hear the sickening, wet sound of their lips meeting. "So, what exactly happens when she comes back from her little dramatic getaway?" Julian chuckled, a dry, hollow sound that made my skin crawl and my blood turn to solid ice. "She comes back to an eviction notice and a mountain of corporate debt. I am filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy on the startup on Monday morning. I structured the initial limited liability company agreements so that she is the primary guarantor on all the major business loans. I used her spotless credit to secure the funding. When the company goes completely under, the creditors will completely bypass me and go straight for her throat. She will be buried in millions of dollars of debt, completely ruined, and we will be sitting on the balcony of that beautiful penthouse in Miami, drinking champagne." "Do you feel even a little bit bad for her?" Chloe asked. There was zero genuine empathy in her question. It was nothing but morbid, cruel curiosity. For my wife," Julian scoffed loudly, the sound vibrating with pure arrogance. "God, no. She is so incredibly naive. She is always burying her face in her blueprints, obsessing over load-bearing walls and structural integrity, while I dismantled our entire foundation right under her nose. She is a boring, predictable workaholic who actually thought she could control everything just because she draws nice houses. She deserves a brutal reality check. And the kid, she will figure it out." Julian dismissed the very existence of his only son with a casual, flippant tone. "She is a survivor. She will probably have to move back into her parents' cramped basement. I cannot be tied down by playing house with her anymore. Chloe, I need a real life. I need you. I need this money." In that exact, agonizing moment, the weeping, heartbroken wife inside of me died. She did not just fade away quietly. She was violently murdered, incinerated by a white-hot inferno of absolute primal rage. Every single muscle in my body tensed with an animalistic urge to storm down the stairs, grab the heaviest iron fireplace poker I could find, and smash their smiling, arrogant faces into the hardwood floor. A ragged, guttural sob clawed its way forcefully up my throat, to stop myself from making a sound. I shoved my right hand deep into my mouth and bit down hard on my own flesh. I bit down until the sharp, copper taste of warm blood flooded my tongue, using the intense physical pain to ground myself, to keep the monstrous fury from completely overriding my rational mind. I pulled my trembling, blood-stained hand away from my mouth. I took a deep, silent breath, forcing the frantic, erratic beating of my heart to slow down to a steady, calculated rhythm. Crying was a useless biological function. Screaming and confronting them now would be a catastrophic strategic error. They thought I was just a naive architect lost in my drawings. They thought I was an easy mark. They were about to learn exactly what happens when a master architect decides to design a flawless demolition. With absolute, chilling clarity, I reached into my damp coat pocket with my clean hand and pulled out my smartphone. I opened the voice memo application, ensuring the audio settings were configured to the highest quality. I held the phone's microphone directly against the small speaker of the baby monitor. I pressed the red circular button. The digital screen illuminated the dark, freezing room with a soft, pale glow as the timer began to tick upward. Second by second, I sat there in the absolute darkness, my eyes wide and bone dry, recording every single syllable of their treason, meticulously capturing the exact blueprints of their impending destruction. I stopped the recording when the digital timer hit exactly 45 minutes and 12 seconds. I immediately uploaded the audio file to 3 separate secure cloud servers and emailed a copy to a newly created, encrypted email address. The evidence was secured. My breathing was steady. my mind sharper than it had been in a decade. I was no longer the weeping, betrayed wife. I was a project manager analyzing a critical structural failure. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and retraced my steps through the freezing, pitch-black house. I moved with the silent, fluid grace of a ghost, gliding down the wooden stairs, avoiding every creaking floorboard by pure instinct. I crawled back out through the narrow basement window, pulling the heavy glass shut behind me, and vanished into the stormy night. I walked the 3 blocks back to my hidden car, the icy rain washing away the last remaining traces of my former self. Instead of driving to a hotel, I drove straight to the gleaming glass tower of Novus Horizon Architecture in downtown Seattle. I let myself into the deserted, silent office using my secure keycard. I walked past the rows of empty cubicles and stepped into my private suite. I turned on the bright, clinical overhead lights, stripped off my soaking wet raincoat, and sat down at my massive drafting table. I unrolled a fresh blank sheet of heavy architectural vellum. I grabbed a black drafting pen. For the next 7 hours, as the city slept, I did not draw a building. I drew a comprehensive, highly detailed blueprint for Julian's complete and utter destruction. I mapped out every vulnerability, every legal loophole, and every financial pressure point. I created a timeline, setting strict deadlines for every phase of my retaliation. At exactly 8 o'clock the following morning, I made my first phone call. I did not hire a therapist. I hired Evelyn Vance. She was widely known as the most ruthless, terrifyingly efficient family law attorney in King County, a woman whose mere name made opposing counsel sweat. I sat in her sleek, mahogany-paneled office and played the recording from the baby monitor. Evelyn did not offer me a tissue or a sympathetic smile. She offered me a lethal, predatory grin. Within 2 hours, Evelyn had brought in Marcus, a top-tier forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering hidden corporate assets and offshore shell companies. I handed them the blueprints I had drawn during the night. Our primary objective was clear. We had to quietly freeze the forged second mortgage and block the international wire transfer of Leo's college fund. Marcus tracked the liquidated funds to a holding account in the Cayman Islands, because we caught the transfer within the crucial 72-hour window. He was able to legally freeze the assets before Julian could finalize the withdrawal, all without sending a single notification to my husband's phone. We filed an emergency injunction under seal, citing severe financial fraud and identity theft. With my legal and financial strike team fully mobilized, the most grueling phase of my project began. I had to go back into that house and play my part. I returned home on Sunday evening, exactly 3 days after my dramatic departure, looking appropriately exhausted and utterly defeated. I found Julian in the kitchen, casually scrolling through his phone. I took a deep breath, forcing hot, pathetic tears to well up in my eyes. "Julian, I am so incredibly sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking perfectly on the final syllable. "You were right. The stress at the firm is completely burning me out. I have been paranoid, demanding, and unfair to you. I love you, and I want to fix this." The look of supreme, arrogant satisfaction that washed over his face made me want to vomit. He stepped forward and pulled me into a tight embrace, kissing the top of my head. "It is okay, Reese," he murmured softly. "I forgive you. We will get through this together." For the next 3 weeks, I delivered the performance of a lifetime. It was a chilling, out-of-body experience. I became the ultimate submissive, adoring wife. I cooked his favorite meals from scratch, praising his non-existent hard work and asking innocent, clueless questions about his startup. I ironed the expensive dress shirts he wore to his secret hotel rendezvous with Chloe. I smiled warmly and offered to pour the wine when Chloe came over for dinner, watching them exchange their secret, mocking glances while I calmly served the roast beef. I even went shopping with Chloe, enduring 3 agonizing hours of her fake, syrupy compliments while we picked out floral arrangements for the upcoming corporate gala. I smiled at her reflection in the mirror, knowing she was admiring herself while standing firmly on a trapdoor I had just built. Every time he lied to my face, every time he kissed my cheek with those treacherous lips, the armor around my heart grew thicker and colder. I was giving him enough rope to hang himself, entirely lulling him into a false sense of absolute security. He thought he had completely broken my spirit. He had absolutely no idea he was sleeping next to a loaded gun. While Julian was busy picking out furniture for his Miami penthouse, I was systematically dismantling his precious startup. Every night, after he took his sleeping pills and fell into a deep, snoring slumber, I slipped into his home office, using a miniature flashlight held between my teeth. I photographed every single page of his hidden physical ledgers. I found the documents detailing the shell companies he and Chloe had created to siphon the investor funds. I compiled the evidence into neatly organized, heavily encrypted digital dossiers. I did not send them to the police, not yet. Instead, I sent the packets from an anonymous, untraceable server directly to the 5 major angel investors backing his company. I did not accuse him outright. I merely planted highly specific, deeply concerning questions about the recent capital expenditures, suggesting they demand a full, independent financial audit immediately following the launch party. I was priming the explosive charges, setting them deep within the foundation of his fake empire. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Julian handed me a glossy, gold-embossed invitation. It was for the official launch gala of his tech startup, a massively expensive, high-profile event designed to secure the final round of venture capital funding before he and Chloe declared bankruptcy and vanished. The gala was scheduled for the coming Saturday night at the Grand Pacific Hotel. "I really want you by my side, Reese," Julian said, adjusting his silk tie in the mirror. "It is going to be the biggest night of my entire career. I need you looking your absolute best." "Of course, darling," I replied smoothly, flattening the lapels of his suit jacket. "I will not let you down. I have a very special surprise planned for the evening." I spent $2,000 on a stunning backless crimson evening gown. I looked like a woman ready to conquer the world. I coordinated the final logistical details with Evelyn and Marcus. I visited the Grand Pacific Hotel the day before the event, slipping the head audio technician a crisp $100 bill to allow me 5 minutes alone in the main control booth. I uploaded a specific, high-definition audio file directly into the main sequence of the presentation software, locking it behind a hidden command prompt. The trap was fully loaded, the safety was off, and my finger was hovering steadily over the trigger. Julian wanted a grand spectacle. I was going to give him an absolute massacre. The Grand Pacific Hotel ballroom was a masterpiece of opulence, bathed in the golden glow of a dozen crystal chandeliers. Over 300 guests filled the room, a sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer evening gowns. These were the elite venture capitalists, the high-net-worth angel investors, and the industry titans Julian had spent the last 2 years desperately courting. Waitstaff glided seamlessly across the marble floors, offering flutes of vintage champagne and caviar canapes. The atmosphere buzzed with the electric energy of money and anticipation. At the front of the grand hall, a massive elevated stage was framed by towering floral arrangements. Julian stood at the center podium, looking like a flawless magazine cover in his tailored velvet dinner jacket. Chloe stood securely by his side, draped in a backless emerald silk gown, projecting the perfect image of a brilliant, sophisticated business partner. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian's voice boomed through the state-of-the-art surround sound system, smooth and dripping with practiced charisma. "Tonight, we are not just launching a company, we are pioneering a revolution in tech architecture, and I owe a massive debt of gratitude to my brilliant partner, Chloe, and to all of you for believing in our vision." He raised his crystal flute high into the air, to the future. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. That was my cue. I stepped out from the shadows of the wings, the heavy silk of my crimson gown sweeping elegantly against the floor. I walked up the side stairs of the stage with my head held high, a serene, loving smile plastered across my face. Julian looked slightly confused as I approached the podium, but he maintained his public mask, wrapping one arm around my waist. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, gently taking the microphone from his hand. My voice rang out clear and steady across the massive ballroom. I know this is Julian and Chloe's special night, but behind every great man is a woman who sees exactly who he truly is. I have prepared a very special, intimate audio tribute to honor my wonderful husband and his extraordinary business partner. Please direct your attention to the screens. I gave a subtle nod toward the hidden control booth at the back of the room. The lights in the ballroom immediately dimmed to pitch black. The massive LED wall behind the stage flared to life, but there was no romantic photo montage. There was no soaring instrumental music. There was only a stark, glowing white waveform pulsing against a pitch-black background. Then, the audio began. I have to admit, Julian, you played that perfectly. Chloe's voice, captured in crystal-clear high definition, blasted out of the massive concert speakers and hit the audience like a physical shockwave. I was starting to think you would never get her out of the house for the weekend. She was clinging to this pathetic domestic fantasy like a drowning woman. A collective gasp ripped through the darkness of the ballroom. Julian's arm rigidly dropped from my waist. I turned my head slowly to look at him. All the color had violently drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. He lunged frantically for the microphone in my hand, but I took a swift step back, my eyes locking onto his with absolute, freezing contempt. The audio continued to echo ruthlessly across the silent room. The final bank transfer cleared this morning. I forged her signature on the second mortgage paperwork 3 weeks ago. The equity on this massive house is completely gone. I pulled out every last cent the bank would authorize. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and chaotic. Someone dropped a champagne flute, the glass shattering loudly against the marble floor. The angel investors, the very people Julian was trying to hustle for millions of dollars, began shouting in outrage. I emptied his entire college fund yesterday afternoon, $150,000, routed straight through the shell company and into the offshore account we set up last month. Chloe staggered backward on her high heels, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in sheer horror. She looked wildly toward the exit, her predatory confidence completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. I am filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy on the startup on Monday morning. I structured the initial limited liability company agreements so that she is the primary guarantor on all the major business loans. When the company goes completely under, the creditors will completely bypass me and go straight for her throat. She will be buried in millions of dollars of debt, completely ruined, and we will be sitting on the balcony of that beautiful penthouse in Miami, drinking champagne. "Turn it off!" Julian finally screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panic as he frantically waved his arms at the control booth. "Cut the power right now." But the technician had already locked the system and walked away, courtesy of my $100 tip. Julian grabbed Chloe's arm, yanking her toward the back stairs of the stage. They were trying to flee like the desperate, cornered rats they truly were, but they did not even make it to the bottom step. The heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance of the ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. The blinding beams of heavy tactical flashlights cut through the dim room. 5 uniformed officers and 2 plainclothes detectives from the Federal Financial Crimes Division marched straight down the center aisle. Evelyn, my shark of a lawyer, had timed their arrival down to the absolute second. "Julian Patterson and Chloe Vaughn," the lead detective barked, his voice easily overpowering the chaotic murmurs of the stunned crowd. "Do not move. You are both under arrest for severe corporate fraud, forgery, and grand larceny." Julian froze completely, his chest heaving as the officers rushed the stage and aggressively yanked his arms behind his back. The metal handcuffs clicked shut with a sharp, satisfying finality. I walked slowly across the stage until I was standing mere inches away from his trembling, pathetic form. I did not shed a single tear. I did not yell. I opened my expensive clutch and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. With a swift, forceful motion, I slammed the heavy packet directly into the center of his chest. He flinched violently as the papers spilled out onto the floor. "Those are the expedited divorce papers. Julian," I said, my voice dripping with pure glacial ice. along with the federal injunctions freezing every single offshore account you thought you successfully hid. You are going to prison with absolutely nothing. I turned my back on him without waiting for a response, walking proudly off the stage as the police dragged my husband and his mistress out of the ballroom in utter disgrace. The legal fallout was swift and utterly merciless. Because of the undeniable audio evidence and the meticulous financial blueprints I had handed to the authorities, Julian and Chloe were both indicted on multiple federal charges. They are currently sitting in jail, facing up to 20 years each in federal prison for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and massive identity theft. As for me, I did not just survive the demolition of my old life, I built a spectacular new one. Last month, I was officially promoted to senior partner at Novus Horizon Architecture. Leo and I moved out of the suffocating suburbs and bought a stunning modern glass house overlooking the waters of Puget Sound. Every morning, the house is flooded with brilliant, warm sunlight. There are no secrets hiding in the shadows, no old baby monitors listening in the dark. I am completely free, fiercely independent, and finally holding the pen that draws the blueprints of my own beautiful destiny. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please let me know your city and country in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to help our channel, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your kindness helps us pay our wonderful staff so they can provide for their families and continue bringing you more amazing revenge stories. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Stay strong and never let anyone tear down your foundation.